So does humanity have an exciting future ahead of us? Well, that depends. Do you want to be a god? How you doing tonight? Excellent. I'm False Prophet with Twisted Jenius, and on this channel we like to explore topics like entertainment and psychology, all from a uniquely villainous perspective. But tonight I'm going to be getting a little philosophical with you, maybe even a bit speculative. I want to ask some questions about humanity. Where are we headed? Why are we doing what we do? And what have we been doing this whole time that we've been on the planet? I would say that maybe we've been chasing godhood. That seems like kind of a big statement, though. Do humans really want to be gods? I would argue that evidence would say so. Everything that we've done up until this point seems to indicate that that's where we're headed and that's what we want. It's like our MO, our modus operandi, our fate even. Not necessarily that I believe in fate, but I think that godhood is something that we seem to secretly crave. Now, I'm not saying that every individual wants that. In fact, I think most people never even really think about this. But it does seem to be the trend for everything we do, every innovation, every piece of progress, everything that we claim that we love seems to fit in with this idea, seems to go in this direction. But allow me to explain what I mean by this. There are three tendencies, three basic ideas that I really want us to look at here in regards to the way humans have done things up until this point. And this goes beyond recorded history. And the first one of these is power, our tendency to want power. And I'm not just talking about power over other humans or economic control or things like that. I mean, we like to have power over nature. We like to control the world as much as possible. And this goes back to the discovery or the invention, however you want to count it, of fire. That was a big game changer. That was one of our major accomplishments, I'd say, especially at the time. During prehistoric times, at some point in human evolution, we began to use fire. And we used it to cook things, we used it for light, and we used it for heat. But we didn't stop there. Eventually, we began finding other ways to warm ourselves. First, using fire in different ways, we created fireplaces. We created wood-burning stoves that we could also use to heat us. Now, we have central heating, central air conditioning. We control these environments to make ourselves more comfortable. We control the air temperature because this is how we want things. But how long is it going to be until we can walk outside and change the actual weather? It's the dream of every classic supervillain, a weather machine. Change the actual weather like the thermostat in a building or our homes there. Change the temperature outside. Impossible? Well, yes, with current technology it is impossible. But over a long enough time span, will it be? Is there some sort of technology out there somewhere that we could master in the distant future that would allow us to actually control weather, to actually control the temperature outside? And if we discovered that technology eventually, once again in our distant future, would we hesitate to use it? Well, probably not. It'd definitely be interesting to a lot of people. The weather can be kind of inconvenient sometimes, so being able to control that would seem kind of handy. Or maybe we won't even go that way with it. Maybe we'll create some sort of bubbles around ourselves, be able to have some kind of device that will allow us to just control the air in our immediate vicinity there. We can just walk around in our own cushions of air. In fact, I have a friend who's a sci-fi author who proposed some similar ideas like this, some sort of fields or something like that you can control the temperature around you in some of his work. And maybe that's the way we'll go with it. We'll each have our own contained air pockets that we can just do whatever we want with. So if it's freezing outside, we can stay warm, or if it's cool outside, we can, stay warm again. But this doesn't just apply to how we heat or cool the air. This can be applied to all kinds of things with human development, human culture. What we consider civilization itself is really dependent on our idea that we want to control and customize our world, hold power over nature itself. Our dwellings that we heat and cool are another excellent example of this. So we began, most likely, living in caves, rocky outcroppings, natural formations like that. We then began building primitive structures, huts, that sort of thing. We created villages. Now we have massive cities, metropolises, concrete jungles, paved over that we designed for our specific purposes. We changed the landscape of the earth in many ways to suit our own needs. This is something that humans excel at. We want to control this stuff. We want to customize stuff, make it more comfortable for us, make it more easy for us, make it the way that we want it. So what's the logical conclusion to this? Where would this go if it keeps progressing? What's our real goal here? Well, if we like to exercise power over our world, over our environment, over nature, then I would argue that our ultimate goal is to be all-powerful, omnipotent. I would say that that is our goal. And over a long enough time span, I would say that that will eventually happen if humans are given enough time on this earth. We will find newer, better, more amazing ways to control our world, to become more powerful. I think that that is actually where we're headed. We want to be omnipotent. We want to be all-powerful. We want to control nature and everything around us. That seems to be the basis of so much progress in everything we do in this world. And so I think that that's a logical outcome if this trend continues of how humans tend to do things in regards to innovation, progress, culture, and many other things. But now let's look at the second category, knowledge. People love knowledge. The first type of way to pass on knowledge was to pass it on through stories, verbal communications, legends, tales, myths, these kinds of things. Sitting around a campfire, talking about what went on, communicating these things through oral tradition. But then we started writing. We created written language. And then we found the ability to print this with the invention of the printing press. Big game changer there. We could create knowledge, pass on information on a more mass scale instead of having to write down and copy everything by hand. And now, of course, we have electronic media. Radio, television, then of course the internet. We love passing on knowledge. As a matter of fact, in my own lifetime, I remember going to the library. Yes, I've always been kind of a book nerd. I used to volunteer for the library when I was in school and even in elementary school. And I would also go to the public library. I used to know the Dewey Decimal System like the back of my hand. And yes, I am bragging about that. But I would go to the library, and it would occur to me as a kid that this was all the information I had right here. If no one wrote about it, if no one put it in a book, then I would never get to read about it. I would never know that. Or even worse, the book could exist, but if it was not at that physical location, then it might as well not exist. And keep in mind, there was a time when ordering books was way more of a hassle than it was now. In fact, you used to be able to get publisher catalogs, but if the book was out of print, then you just had to hope that a used bookstore would have it somewhere, and then you would happen across it, find it, and be able to buy it, and you were kind of limited by that. And this dawned on me, even as a kid, just kind of looking at the library going, wow, this is stupid. Wow, even if the book exists, there's no guarantee I'll ever be able to get my hands on it. And maybe there was some other ways of getting a hold of books back then. I was a kid, so I probably wasn't, completely in the know, but there's no doubt that the internet just blew everything up when it came to information. In fact, late 90s, early 2000s, this was a very common thing to rave about in regards to the internet. Just how amazing it was that now information was just right there, and that never happened before. I mean, now we're kind of used to it, but I can still remember just how crazy this is, if you really think about it. How crazy it is to just be able to go on and find something out. You don't even need books anymore. If you want a book, we have Amazon, we have eBay. It doesn't even matter if it's out of print. If someone's willing to sell it, you can still get a hold of it. And that doesn't even count or include all of the information like YouTube videos, blogs, articles, podcasts. The list just goes on as far as how much information is out there just ready at your fingertips. And it's really amazing. And it's very clear that humans do not want to stop there. We want more information. We want to have even more knowledge. We love this. So what's the ultimate conclusion here? What's the logical outcome if we keep pursuing knowledge this way, and ease of use of knowledge, and gaining as much knowledge as we possibly can? Well, I would say it's omniscience, becoming all-knowing. That seems to be the goal of humanity. We want to become omniscient. We want to know everything. The pursuit of knowledge, science, that would be kind of its goal in the end. We want to become omniscient. And the third category I want to discuss is health. We want to be healthy. We like being healthy. This is so obvious it doesn't even need explaining, really. We like to be healthy. We like to feel good. We like to function as living beings, as organisms, as animals, as people. And we like to live longer. And this has been a pursuit since probably the beginning of humanity, since the beginning of conscious thought, really. We like to be healthier, and we go to great lengths to try to be healthier, to live longer, to feel better, to be stronger. And we've made incredible strides with this. If you just think about the idea of how long we live now compared to different times in human history. There was a time in human history where most people didn't live past 30. Now that's considered kind of young almost. It's like, oh, you're 30. Well, you're still kind of getting started out. You know, that's actually a common attitude, especially in regards to career and that sort of thing now. It's really incredible if you think about it. And of course, we also have a tendency to want to eliminate anything that can kill us. So diseases are obviously a prime example of this. Now, there are still diseases around, and they do still kill people. But we have gotten rid of so many diseases, or found ways to counteract them, or push them back, or avoid them, that used to be huge problems for people in human history. Diseases that killed millions, billions of people are now no longer a thing in some cases, or especially in certain parts of the world. And even when they come up, it's kind of weird and rare. Like, what was this? The, Middle Ages here? We've eliminated so many things that could kill us. And not just small things either, big things. Think about large predators for a second. There was a time, during prehistoric times in human history, where a big concern was actually cave lions. Prehistoric big cats. We know this because during a certain period in human history in a certain region, we have found bones, fossil remains of humans, and a large portion of them were apparently killed by these large predators. And so, just wrap your head around that for a moment. There was a time when one of your biggest concerns was during the night getting attacked and drug off by a large land-going predator that's actually bigger and meaner than the lions we have now. And that's how a certain percentage of people died right there. That was a problem. But we humans have become really good at killing large things that kill us. I would argue that maybe wolves in Europe, for example, we kind of wiped those out to a certain extent. In fact, we've gotten so good at killing off, wiping out some of these large predators, that today we actually have to have laws to protect those animals from ourselves. Some of them are endangered at this point because we've gotten so good, so powerful as a species. Another place where we've excelled recently is in the form of exercise. Even just a couple of generations ago, even when my grandfather was a kid, the fitness industry pretty much didn't exist back then. We're talking about Depression era times here. This idea of going and working out at the gym, exercising as a form of recreation and just to stay in shape, is a relatively new idea. Throughout most of human history, our exercise came from actual manual labor, some sort of skill or craft, or just having to walk from place to place because there was no other transportation. But now we actually exercise for fun, to stay healthy. Some of the kind of physiques you see on a lot of bodybuilders, people who train, and there's a lot of these guys around now. Not everybody's like this. They still might be a minority, but it's very common to see guys who are very muscular now. That was considered impossible during a certain time in human history. You didn't see guys like that because this wasn't a thing. We didn't have the knowledge. We didn't have the workout regimen. The dietary needs that you would need to bulk up like that just didn't exist. The means to do that we didn't have before. So we're living longer, we're getting stronger, and we're getting healthier. And what's really interesting is, at least in America, and I'm sure this applies to other countries as well, our biggest thing, the two biggest killers of people these days, are either heart attack or heart problems, heart disease, or cancer. And I think this is a really amazing thing if you think about it. Yes, I just said that heart disease and cancer are really amazing things, but bear with me here. Just think about this for a second. At this point, we're killing ourselves more than anything else external is killing us. It's either our lifestyle or just our bodies naturally breaking down are two of our biggest killers right now. We've almost eliminated everything that could kill us from the outside, and now we just have to get these natural processes in line so that we don't have to break down and we have lifestyles that don't kill us. But we're whittling this down. We're getting more and more control over our own mortality. And this, of course, has been a dream since the beginning of humanity. It's the fountain of youth, immortality. It's always been our goal, I'd argue, but now we are getting closer to that. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen in our lifetime. Probably, it may be several thousand years before we actually get really super long lifespans, but we're working on this. That would be the logical, extreme conclusion to the way we've been progressing as a species since we started out. We want to be immortal. So we have omnipotence, being all-powerful, omniscience, being all-knowing, and immortal, living forever. If you think about it, these are three attributes that are mostly associated with God. And it's very clear to me that this is what humans actually want. We want to be God. And you can put nearly all human progress, all human innovation, everything that we consider good, everything that we praise for other people, in one of these categories. Or if you can't put it in one of those categories, then there's another category, which, perhaps not ironically or not surprisingly, is also associated with God, creation. All art would fall under this category. In fact, artists, almost by definition, like to create worlds, create characters, create ideas that don't exist. These are people who are literally saying, hey, I have this thing that I can do better. I'm taking this idea of reality here and I'm making something else out of it. I'm creating something else that does not necessarily exist. Sometimes it's completely separate from actual reality because I can do this. I can do better in a sense. Now, maybe they don't actually think that they can do better than reality. In fact, I'd argue that most of them don't probably actually think that. But there's kind of an interesting mentality there if you really think about it. The idea, the desire for creation is definitely considered a godlike feature. That idea that we can build something from our own minds that does not exist yet, that we can control this, that we can create our own worlds in the case of books or video games and that sort of thing. Create our own characters, create our own life. Oh, and here's something else really interesting. Think about this for a second. Alexa, the Amazon Echo technology, smart speakers. Here we have something that is created in our own image, or at least has a human voice, that we design just to control, that we design to just take care of the petty tasks that we don't feel like doing to make our lives easier. This is a thing that we kind of sort of model after us, after our own voice at least, that we can talk to easily. That's designed to be essentially a slave. Just think about the ego involved with that. Just step back for a minute and just think about what we actually did there by creating something like that. And this isn't even something new. That's the thing. This isn't even surprising to most people. This isn't a new idea. In fact, the whole idea of a robot, I don't remember exactly when that idea or that word was first coined, but when that term was coined, it was actually a reference to automated slavery. It wasn't necessarily robotics in the sense that we think about them now, but it was an automaton, a creation that we wanted for automated labor, and that's how we often use them. We're creating stuff to serve us, to make our lives easier, and we often try to mimic stuff that's either in nature or even in our own image sometimes. Even the idea of gods themselves. Think about the gods of ancient Greece or Romans or Egyptian or Norse gods or Indian gods. Pick your culture, pick your ancient history of gods there, any polytheistic religion, and what you usually see there are gods that are very flawed, and often it's a little bit like a soap opera sort of thing. There's some real projection going on there. Here are these gods, these divine beings that have real human flaws, but are just doing it on a cosmic scale. I mean, that's gotta tell you something about where humans' mindset is, right? And I can't help but think of that as a sort of wish fulfillment, or it's a sort of dream. It's projecting our desire onto the world, onto the universe. And there's so many other examples of this we could use. It's just so prevalent. It's not even surprising anymore. It's not even, it just goes without saying. It's part of the human condition. And that's my point. Humans seem to genuinely want to be gods. Now, of course, one catch to humans even coming close to anything that's like an actual god would be that we'd have to sacrifice our own humanity to do that. And that brings us into the territory of transhumanism. It's the idea that we can modify ourselves in some way to transcend humanity, to transcend the natural limitations that humans have. And this is one of the many reasons why I find villains so inspirational. There's a certain type of villain, a certain class of villain, that seems like they're always willing to sacrifice their own humanity for power or immortality or things like that. So, for example, in fiction at least, there's several means of doing this. So you have the category of supernatural methods. A villain might decide he wants to be a vampire by choice, because it's immortal and he gets to go around and suck people's blood and live at night and, gives super strength, all that great stuff. Maybe he becomes a demonic avatar, summoning some sort of Lovecraftian being to inhabit him and mutate or, be instilled with some sort of, dark energy or something like that. And there's, of course, science fiction, which has electronic means, downloading your brain into a computer, putting your brain physically into a robot body, becoming a cyborg, upgrading like that. Or chemical means, some sort of super serum sort of situation there, allowing you to get stronger, better. Mutation, once again, becoming kind of a Lovecraftian entity through genetic means. you see this kind of thing with villainous characters, particularly in fiction, all of the time, and I kind of think that this is sort of a little bit of a wish fulfillment there. It's like these characters kind of look at what humanity's already doing, and they're thinking ahead. They're kind of ahead of the curve there a little bit. They know what's going on, and they're acting on this very natural human impulse that I think many of us don't really want to admit, but seems to be there below the surface, at least for the species as a whole. Maybe not necessarily on an individual level, but humans seem to want that. We want to transcend our limitations. We really don't like nature, if you really think about this. We're subservient to it, and that's kind of the problem. When people talk about why nature is so great, why it's so important, I think a lot of times it's because we kind of need it right now. We're trapped by it. Natural foods, for example. Why are natural foods so important to us? Because they're healthier than some artificial stuff, for the time being. But how long is it going to take us before we can start producing food that's better than anything nature could provide? That's just more nutritious, more healthy, just superior. Well, we need some more knowledge before we can do that, and we probably need better methods of controlling how we produce things. We may need some new sciences that we don't have currently. But it's really interesting that the truth is, nature kind of has us stuck right now. We're still subjected to its will there. We can still die of disease. We still are trapped in this environment that we can't always control. We can't control the weather. We don't know everything about what's going on in the world, in nature, in the universe, in our own biology. But we want to. We want to have that power over nature. Like a space shuttle trying to force its way out of the Earth's gravitational pull, we want to escape nature. We want to control it. We don't want to have to do what it wants. We want it to do what we want it to do. And a lot of people don't want to admit that because that sounds really egotistical and kind of messed up, and it is, but that's why I love it. It's very ambitious, but it's so clear that that's what humans actually want. We want nature to do things our way, to have it under our thumb, and that's God right there. Think about that. That is what God wants, or what God is. He's someone who controls nature. In fact, in many cultures, much of the time, even in current culture, God and nature are often considered the same thing. So, symbolically at least, if we're trying to control nature, if we want to subvert nature to our will, then that means that we're trying to become God. We're trying to knock him off his throne and become gods ourselves. And honestly, I think that's what humanity really does want. We love control. We love not having to work around the limitations that we as animals are born into. We want to become better than that. We want to become above that. And I want to be clear, I don't actually believe in any literal God. I think nature itself is indifferent, and we're a product of a whole lot of different things coming together in a really particular sort of way, but not necessarily deliberate. But the symbolism here is really interesting to me. In fact, I would say that perhaps the idea of God, if we create our own gods, the idea of God is just a projection of what we ultimately want for ourselves. And if you do believe in a literal God, well, then I would say that humans want to overthrow him at the end. Which is also interesting from that standpoint, too, if you do believe that. But either way, it's very clear to me that that is our goal, even if we don't say it, even if we didn't take the time as a species to really write that out. That definitely seems to be what we really want. There's that famous line from Spider-Man, "With great power comes great responsibility." But that only applies up to a certain point. If you were a literal god, if you were all-powerful, you wouldn't need any responsibility. And I think in a certain way, we instinctually know this, too. With enough power, you can avoid any negative consequences. Because that's why we, as humans, need responsibility. And I do agree that we, as humans, do need responsibility. Because there can be very strong negative consequences if we don't exercise that. But if we were true gods, if we were all-powerful, all-knowing, and immortal, responsibility wouldn't be necessary at all because we wouldn't be subject to anything. Nothing could affect us. We would be untouchable, essentially. And I think that that's part of the appeal of the idea there. In fact, that's most of the idea. Even if you did make a mistake as a god, if you were truly all-powerful, then you could just redo it. Do over. Wipe the slate clean. Okay, we're just gonna start over here, you know. It's no big deal for you. Nothing can harm you, nothing can really stop you, and you can do anything you want. You have the power for creation or destruction. It kind of doesn't matter after a certain point. And in theory, you could also modify your own thoughts or desires or whatever, so even if something did upset you, you could just make it, you know, go away. In fact, I'm very fond of that idea anyway. Us humans can actually do that to a certain extent. Some of my other videos are about that, but that's what we kind of seem to want as human beings. We want that level of control. But now comes the question, will we ever get that? Will we as a species ever actually become gods? I think that question really depends on how long we last. If we last long enough, if human race can continue indefinitely over a long enough period of time, I would say that is our destiny. That is where we're headed. Everything that we've done before now seems to indicate that that's where we want to go, and we seem to be slowly but surely progressing towards that. Every little step, every little innovation that we're creating, every little thing we do seems to be just one little notch closer to that idea. And we do have setbacks. There are some really bad ideas out there that do not help us. But in general, that seems to be how we progress. And we have been progressing as a species. We probably live in the best time in human history, all things considered, right now. In fact, I'd say we definitely do. Statistically, if you want to be objective about this, we live in the best time ever in human history. And so far. But will there be better times? Probably. Unless something really terrible happens, I suspect there will be much better times ahead. So, will we survive long enough to become gods? Well, I think that that's going to depend on whether, A, do we destroy ourselves by some way? A lot of apocalyptic visions, science fiction visions of the future are concerned with this idea that in our search for power, we will inadvertently destroy ourselves, and that could happen. And then, of course, there's whether something that's completely out of our control also decides to destroy us. A meteor could just come down, slam into the Earth, create a nuclear winter, and we're gonna wish that we were immortal already. So, it's hard to say, really, but I think that if we survive long enough, then that is really our future. And that's very interesting to me. It's exciting. I like the idea of it. It makes sense to me from everything that I see from human nature, everything that we do, what we admire, what we seem to want. It's just our nature to want to conquer nature, I think. And I think that maybe we'd be happier if we just admitted that. I'm very for being consciously aware of this idea that humans do want to be gods, or any other word you want to describe this state that we're talking about here, where we surpass the limitations of our own nature and become something better. I love this idea. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think we're destined to be gods? Is that really human race's modus operandi? Is that really our nature? Or where do you guys stand on this topic? I'm actually very curious about that. And please don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any more thoughtful villainy or dark fun. I'm False Prophet with Twisted Jenius, saying stay evil, and good night. Ray, if someone asks you if you want to be a god, you say, yes!